Hey, this is Cory, and today we're going to be making the Bombshell Batwoman dress. So I already started making a mock-up for it, and to do that I used New Look number 6299. This is the same dress that I used for my Mary cosplay. So for the bodice, I just cut out the dress pieces to the length of 2 inches below the marked waistline on the patterns to turn it into a shirt instead of a dress. And then because this is a mock-up, I made it out of white muslin and didn't bother zigzagging the edges or anything because it's just going to be cut up to make the pattern. And I only made one sleeve because, once again, it's just going to be used to create the pattern. So once I was happy with the fit of the shirt portion of the dress, just as a note, I only used 1/2 inch seam allowances instead of the full 5/8 seam allowance because in the comic her top seems a little loose instead of being super form-fitted, so to give a little bit of extra room I made smaller seam allowances. And then just took a pen and started sketching on the neckline. And here's what the bodice looks like with the new neckline. The next step is to seam rip the mock-up apart, iron the pieces, and then you have your new pattern. For Batwoman sleeves, we are going to cut 4 pieces out of the black fabric. Then we're going to iron them and zigzag around the edges to keep them from fraying. Next, take the sleeve pieces, sew them together along the bottom of the sleeve, then press open. Sew red bias tape along the edge of one of the sleeves, then, putting right sides together, sew along the edge. Turn the sleeve right side out and then sew the 2 pieces together along the edge. When it's done, you can flip the side with the bias tape so that it's visible, and the sleeve will look like this. To make Batwoman's skirt, I made a circle skirt pattern out of some wrapping paper. This is half of the skirt, and then you fold your fabric and line it up so the folds are along the edges, so when you cut it out you're pretty much going to get a donut of fabric. And I cut one out of red fabric and one out of black fabric. Putting right sides together, pin the skirts along the outer edge and then sew them together. I used the mock-up pattern to create the back of the bodice. In a slightly unusual fashion, I heat and bonded some of the red fabric to the back piece, and that's because the heat and bond doesn't really stick to this fabric, so I can pull it off later. So what's actually holding the heat and bonded appliques to the bodice is the satin stitching. And then I taped the outline of the letters and numbers to the whole thing. So this is what I ended up doing to have all of the letters match up and have them be in the right position. So I taped the printout of the design from the DC website, and I taped it on top of the giant heat and bonded red rectangle. Then I sewed through the paper, through the fabric and the heat and bond, the designs. Then I ripped off the paper and then used a pair of scissors to cut around the design and then satin stitched it in place. For the front of Batwoman's bodice, I used the mock-up to create it out of more of the black cotton sateen. And I've seen multiple cosplayers do this very different ways, and that's understandable considering that the source material is it changes so much, like even frame from frame in the comic book. But considering it was a 1940s era type design, I decided to go for a pullover style, considering things would have been rationed and just considering comfort and ease of wear, as around that time period they probably wouldn't have been using stretch fabrics. And for the design on the front, I cut out a pattern for the Bat logo using the PDF from DC's website and printed it out, and now we're going to make the applique. Next, I ironed some heat and bond onto some of the red fabric that we used for the lining, and then I traced the bat design onto the heat and bond, and now we're going to cut it out. Then iron the patch onto the front of the bodice, and then I used a tight zigzag stitch to satin stitch around the edges of the applique. Connect the two bodice pieces together along the shoulders. To make the collar piece, I drew the design onto the mock-up and cut it out, and then cut two out of the black fabric and zigzagged around the edges. Well, I should say this is the fold, so you're going to cut two of this shape out of the black fabric. And then on one side, sew red bias tape. Sew the two collar pieces together, then turn them right side out and press flat. Sandwich the collar piece in between the lining and the outside of the bodice and sew them all together along the neckline. Attach the bodice pieces together at the side, and then attach the sleeves. For Batwoman's belt loops, we're going to start by cutting 8 rectangles out of black fabric and zigzagging around the edges. Then put right sides together and sew them together along the long sides. Then we're going to turn it right side out and press flat. To attach the belt loop to the bodice, put zigzagged edge towards the end of the bodice, pin down, and you're going to sew it along the end. Then flip the belt loop over and sew along the bottom. Lastly, sew the skirt to the bodice. And with that, Batwoman's dress is done. For more cosplay tutorials, please subscribe, and as always, if you have any suggestions for any characters you'd like to see me make a tutorial for, please comment below. Thank you!